Where'd my engine go? Well, finally I was able to pull the whole drivetrain out of here. The only thing left in the car now is the rear differential. And there is the engine and transmission assembly, all attached to the engine lift. I just got done pulling it out. It's still leaking fluid in the transmission, or in the catch pan down there from the transmission tail housing. And I wanted to film it, but as I got deeper and deeper into it, I just kept on going, and it wouldn't really have been that good of a video anyway. I wouldn't be able to talk about it. But that is one heavy piece of machinery there. That took a lot of work to get that thing out of there, and a lot of trial and error and ingenuity. What I have here, the solution I came up with, is to get two of these chains from O'Reilly's, these engine lifting chains. These look very similar to the engine lifting brackets that are on that F250 I showed you in the last video that Ford just left attached on there, but with these newer engines they haven't done that. But they did leave you two 12mm metric bosses here to screw in some bolts. And the main thing I was concerned about with getting this thing out of here was the location of these engine lift points, because one is in the back and then we have another in the front there, and that makes it very difficult to use the engine leveler, because the engine leveler is really designed to tilt the engine front and back so you can work it up back into the chassis, but the way they have it designed here, it's just going to go side to side. So the engine leveler, I really couldn't use it for its intended purpose, but it is nice to have because it's spreading that load out away from the chain. And that's very important on this modular engine, because one of the critical things I had to look out for in doing all this is not to damage the valve covers. Not so much on this ruined engine, but not on the 13,000 mile engine. And as the chains are tensioned up, if they're not far out enough, they're going to wrap around this valve cover and just crush the valve cover all to pieces. So the solution to that was to extend the chain. The engine lifting chain from O'Reilly's comes with this bracket, but also the engine leveler comes with this chain too. So by lengthening the chain like that, I'm able to stay well clear of those valve covers. You can even, I don't know if you can tell, but they're not even making contact. So those valve covers are not going to be damaged whatsoever. And one of the other things I had to think about was I had to locate these engine lifting brackets far enough away from the head, but not so far that I would contact the AC evaporator assembly. It had to be just right, just the right length, so I can basically effectively move that chain assembly away from this delicate plastic valve cover here. So I ended up choosing 12mm bolts that are 60 millimeters long, and to prevent the brackets from moving around or moving inward, I've got a nut and a washer on the back side of both of these. Now the 12mm bolts are tightened down just snug with a wrench, but these nuts back here are actually just finger tight. I can't move them now because it's under tension, but this one I can move a little bit. And that I did that on purpose. I'm just trying to think this thing through as logically as I can, and I left these loose like that because as the engine hoist tilts up, it's also tilting forward, and I wanted these engine lifting brackets to kind of follow along with the motion of everything else, but still provide lifting force as well too, so there's maximum flexibility there. And that's the name of the game when you're moving something this big and heavy, is you have to have your flexibility because you're going to be moving this thing all around, up and down, and left and right to work it on out of there. So this was one of the more challenging projects. I say was, it actually still is. I mean, it's not finished yet by any means. I'd like to have videoed the entire thing, but it just wasn't feasible. I did take some saran wrap and wrap it around the tail housing where the drive shaft was and put a rubber band around it, but evidently it snagged on something and punctured. And now I have several quarts of used transmission fluid on the driveway, which everybody needs. So I'll clean that up. So in the future, I think what I'll do is I'll go ahead and drop the pan on this, and because it has that bump, it is a 4R70W or 7W. I'll just go ahead and drain all the fluid and minimize the amount of fluid that comes out when I change the take the drivetrain out of the wrecked car. And I'll do the same with the engine oil. And one of the mistakes that I've certainly made when I was just starting out in working on cars, and the mistakes that a lot of people make when they do a project like this, is they tend to remove too much. And you don't really, I mean, you have to remove a lot of parts, certainly, to get an entire engine and transmission out. But you want to minimize the number of parts that you remove, because it just minimizes the work and it minimizes the chances for mistakes. And if you notice, I was able to remove the engine and transmission while keeping the cooler lines still attached. So they're not, that seal there is not broken. I've got the transmission dipstick tube still attached and attached to the engine. That hasn't moved anywhere. I've also got the wiring harness. This is an electronic transmission, so this is the main wiring harness to control the shift solenoids. This goes to your O2 sensors. Same thing here. And then on the other side, we have the manual lever position sensor, vehicle speed sensor, and probably the temperature sensor. All those accessories are contained in this wire bundle that goes up to the side of the transmission and terminates here, which I've got tucked away in the intake manifold. So I didn't have to waste any time removing the manual lever position sensor, all the wiring, and the vehicle speed sensor harness, and everything else. That way the MLP sensor can stay adjusted just right. This is the actual attachment here for the shift cable to put it into gear. So I was able to remove that whole thing while minimizing what I actually had to disassemble. This big plug right here is the main engine wiring harness that goes into the powertrain control module, or ECU as some people like to call it. Controls all the injectors. And then over here is the positive and negative battery cable, still attached, all as one piece, as well as the alternator B+ output. And believe it or not, the starter motor still attached, all the original wiring. So you do have to remove a lot of things, you know, bolts for the engine mounts and things like that. There's a through bolt that goes through here, and then a bolt that goes on the top for your passenger side engine mount. And then the left side, for some reason, is a little bit different. It's basically held on with two through bolts. One through bolt here, and one that goes here. And that holds the engine in place. And then, like any car, you've got a rear transmission mount, or rear engine mount, which goes right here. And that sits right on top of that cross member there, which had to be removed. So the process was, I prepped this engine up for removal, disconnected all the wiring, the coolant hoses, vacuum lines, all those kinds of things, throttle linkage, all that stuff. And then I disconnected or removed the engine mounting bolts, and you can do that fairly easily because all the weight of the engine is going downward. So they actually come out fairly easily. And the last thing I did is I put a jack under that transmission to raise it up, remove the cross member, and then slowly lower the jack down to tilt the whole assembly down as I worked it out. And you can see it's at a pretty sharp angle there. It was very difficult to get it out of the car because one of the drawbacks of the solution I came up with is I have a very long chain. And this engine lift only goes up to a certain height. I forgot what the number was, 96 inches or something like that. So I had the front of the car jacked up on these jack stands on the frame so the suspension was in full rebound, and I didn't have enough clearance to make it out of the engine bay. So what I ended up doing is making this thing take a bow, and I removed the jack stands, and to get even more height, took off the front tires and let the car sit on the brake rotors, protecting them with this block of wood here on each side. I didn't want to let it rest on this delicate dust shield. So that's perfectly fine to do that. Let the car down gently. And even then, you can see some evidence of scrapage there on that frame cross member. Even then, it was a little bit tricky to get out, but obviously it did come out. And the main method I used to do that was I had a jack. I worked that jack in between these two legs of the engine hoist, and I had that lifting up on the back end of this transmission, either sometimes on the pan, sometimes on the rear transmission mount, and then sometimes back here on the tail housing to raise that thing up enough to clear the frame cross member and clear the bumper. You can see the tracks I left as this thing came out. So it was a matter of scooting the engine hoist back 2 or 3 inches at a time, and then moving that jack back 2 or 3 inches, an equal amount, and just working it out slowly like that. Going in is going to be a different story. I'm not sure how I'm going to handle that. Might have to have somebody come over and help me do that, but that jack on the transmission pan worked out pretty good. It doesn't take a whole lot of force to raise the ass end of it up, but probably more force than somebody can do for a long period of time. You can lift it up for a few seconds, but you'll have to lift it up for quite a while to work it all the way back in there and get it set just right. So with this video, I'm kind of going over the logic I used to get this engine out of here and kind of give you guys a procedure on how you guys can get the engine out. You don't have to lift it up out of here as a complete assembly. There's a good case can be made for separating the engine and transmission first, then just lifting them out as two separate assemblies. Had I done that, the engine would be nearly horizontal, which would be much easier just to go pop it right out of the car and move it away. But if you remember, and I haven't torn this engine down, but what I think happened is that something happened with the hydraulic chain tensioner on the passenger side, allowing that chain to flap around and cause this camshaft sprocket here to jump time. And so we have, this is an interference engine, and so we have a little bit of valve collision going on, actually a lot of valve collision, so much that it broke 2 or 3 of the rocker arms in half. So this engine is seized, basically. It'll free itself up if I pull the heads off, or pull this one head off, but I can't really rotate the engine. And because I can't rotate the engine, I can't work up under that inspection plate and remove the 4 torque converter to flywheel mounting bolts to separate the transmission. You could, if you really, really wanted to, go ahead and unbolt that bell housing and try to work that transmission loose and leave the torque converter attached to the flywheel, but that would be really, really tricky to do. It'd be dangerous to do. That transmission alone is pretty heavy. I think it's at least 200 pounds, probably more, with the converter attached. And I wouldn't want to cause any damage to the delicate front end seal, the oil pump seal on there. So I thought that it was just better to go ahead and separate pull the whole thing out as an assembly. I'm not quite sure what I'll do on the wrecked Crown Victoria. Its engine is not seized. I might go ahead and try to separate the two, because I do have a transmission jack I recently purchased. I can go ahead and work that transmission out of there and then get the engine out as well. Although once you get the new motor back into the vehicle and you're lying on your back like this, you don't have the advantage of having a professional car lift. It's pretty difficult to get these transmissions worked up in there just at the right angle to bolt them up. But it can be done. People do that in a driveway all the time. So I think I'm going to, of course, not leave it like that. I'm going to put this thing on a old crate, or not crate, but a pallet that that the generator I have came with, and just set that thing aside, probably over there with some of the other pieces. And then I'll go ahead and be able to work on taking the opportunity to replace some of the other parts, maybe the power steering gear and some of the air conditioning bits. It's now the shop manual I have is a 1993 shop manual. This is a 1995 Crown Victoria. They really haven't changed a whole lot. And it recommended, or actually required, you to discharge the AC system and remove the engine with the compressor. And just so you guys know, if you're working on a Mercury or Lincoln Town Car or Crown Victoria, you do not have to do that. This air conditioning system is still completely intact. I just dropped the compressor and let it lay on the tie rods, and basically just move that out of the way. And these fittings right here can rotate 360 degrees. Same thing with the fittings on the compressor. So this whole evaporator assembly is able to tilt all the way up like that and lay on the fender up and out of the way, so the engine can move forward out of the car. I put the evaporator back because I want to minimize the stress on the connections. But it remains to be seen whether I can swap out the entire heater, evaporator, receiver dryer assembly, basically the entire AC system. I'm thinking that I can. It's going to come out in two pieces: the blower motor and evaporator assembly, and then the heater core is just going to come forward like that. The heater core is going to remain inside the car. I'll have to tear into the dashboard and to get that heater core out. I definitely want to replace the heater core because this coolant definitely has not been changed. It's in pretty bad shape, as you can see from the heater inlet fitting there on the engine. So a lot of work going on, but I think, and I have to go through this all over again on the wrecked car. That's why this is taking such a long time, because you basically are stuck doing everything twice. But once I set that down, I'll be able to get busy on the non-wrecked car and take some lessons learned from the white car and apply that to the nice engine and get this engine out of here. And I won't even bother setting it down. I'll leave it on the hoist and just wheel it on back over here and drop her in. With a project this extensive, when you're disassembling a car to this degree, there's usually some damage. I don't have any damage to the transmission pan. You can just see where I scraped off some of the grease. Transmission pan's not bent or anything like that. Oil pan's in the same shape. Transmission lines, cooler lines aren't damaged or anything. But the odd shape of the shifting mechanism and MLP sensor here snagged on to the one of the emissions hoses here and broke that in half. The metal part is fine, but this part here is destroyed. But no big deal, because I have an exact OEM replacement from that car right there. And that is, I guess, the main thing that makes this project. This is a hard project, but this having a car, an identical car right here, really makes things a lot easier, because when you do find damage like that, or if you do damage something on your own, you can learn from that and then go ahead and take the same part off of that car. And it's like having your own junkyard right here at your own house. You don't have to waste any time going back and forth to junkyards and auto parts stores and things like that. So that's pretty much where we're at with the Crown Victoria disassembly. I'm going to go ahead and get some paper towels and soak up as much of that fluid as I can, and then put some kitty litter down there to soak up the rest of it, and then I'll block off the catalytic converter input so no junk falls down in there. And then I'll think about everything I've done and see if I can find a better way of doing it. And then I'll go ahead and start wrenching on that car. So I'm just trying to document everything. I'm trying to get the size of this stuff. I'm climbing up on the front porch here. You can see just how big everything is. I can't really get it in frame, but definitely a big, heavy component. No doubt about that. And one of the good things is that transmission's actually good, so I can give the engine to a junkyard or something like that, or play around with it myself and just kind of do some exploring, and then keep the transmission. I got a spare transmission. That's a 4R7W, and then what's in the other car is an AODE. And it's interesting, I think that transmission's been remanufactured, because this 95 Crown Vic should also have the AODE. So kind of lucked out in that regard. I've got a fairly new transmission. The fluid smells pretty good, and the guy that sold me the car said that he never had any problem with the transmission shifting. So if I'm careful, I can what I have to do is pull this right head off so I can rotate the engine, and then I'll get this transmission off of here, clean it up, and I'll end up having me a spare transmission for a rainy day. So still a lot more work to do. I've got the radiator cradle all ready to go. That's all finished to pop back in here, but I'm glad I did not put that back in, because I would not have been able to, with the limited height of this engine hoist, and it's almost reaching the ceiling, it's still not high enough, I would not be able to get that engine in here. So that makes another strong case for separating the engine and transmission if you can. If you're just doing an engine swap or taking the engine out of your Crown Vic, Mercury, Marquis, or Lincoln Town Car, you don't have to disassemble your car quite this much to get the drivetrain out. You can separate the two halves, but turns out I had to disassemble it to this degree because the older radiator cradle was very damaged, and so was the radiator. So I had to replace the radiator cradle anyway, and I just kind of lucked out that I had to do that, because that made it possible, because you can see the angle of these two things. That made it possible to get this engine and transmission on out of here very carefully. You can see how much more height I would have, basically the height of that fender, if I had the radiator cradle in there. So just trying to keep you guys up to date on everything, and stay tuned for the next video, which will probably be taking the engine out of that car, and finally, after several weeks, getting in this car.